Picture a U.S. soldier stepping off a transport plane in Saudi Arabia, August 1990, and within hours the black leather boots on his feet are splitting at the seams as the desert sun cooks them from the outside in. Now cut forward to 2026, the same terrain, the same war-making machine, but the boot is coyote brown, engineered from the ankle up for exactly this fight. Cut again to the other side of the line, to an Iranian soldier climbing a ridge in the Zagros, wearing a boot built entirely inside his own country because sanctions made every other option disappear. Two militaries, two completely different roads to the same patch of ground, and almost nobody talks about the footwear that carried them there. This is every combat boot worn in the Iran-US war, covering both sides, every generation, every variant that mattered. You will see how American designers learned their lesson the hard way in the Gulf, how Iran built an entire supply chain under economic siege, and how the boots on the ground today are the final product of 35 years of failure, correction, and quiet engineering. And the entire evolution on the American side starts with one boot that should never have crossed the Saudi border. That boot is the standard black leather combat boot, the baseline footwear of the United States Army from the 1950s through the 1980s. It came in a few familiar forms: the direct molded sole variant, the speed lace version, and the early Corcoran jump boot worn by paratroopers, but the fundamental design never strayed far from its roots. It was built for a temperate world, for garrison duty, for European field exercises, and for the kind of soldiering that happened in moderate climates on predictable terrain. Then, in August 1990, it got deployed to a place it was never engineered to survive. The black leather absorbed heat like a radiator in the Saudi sun, skin temperatures inside the boot climbing past anything the design had ever been tested against. The direct molded sole, reliable for decades on cool European soil, began to soften and deform on pavement that measured over 140 degrees. There was no ventilation, no drainage, no mechanism to release the sweat pooling inside. Soldiers developed blisters within hours of their first patrols, and trench foot started appearing in a desert environment, which should have been impossible. General Norman Schwarzkopf was preparing to fight the largest American military operation since Vietnam, and his entire ground force was wearing footwear that had never been validated above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That single mismatch, one boot in the wrong environment, is what set the entire pipeline of American desert footwear in motion. The Army already had a boot that was supposed to handle heat, but it was built for a different kind of hot. That boot was the jungle combat boot, specifically the M1945 and M1966 patterns developed out of earlier experiments stretching back to the M1942 Okinawa precursor. It was the institutional answer to footwear failure in hot climates, refined through 2 decades of fighting in Southeast Asia, and by 1990 it had gone through multiple evolutions, from the first pattern Panama sole to second and third pattern refinements, and eventually Vibram sole versions for better traction. The design philosophy was built around a very specific problem, which was Vietnam. The canvas nylon upper allowed air to circulate and heat to escape. Small drainage ports built into the lower sidewall let water escape after river crossings and monsoon downpours. In the jungle, it saved feet. In Kuwait, it betrayed them. The drainage ports became sand intake ports, funneling fine Gulf grit directly into the boot with every step. Within 48 hours of desert patrolling, boots were filling with abrasive sand that ground at the skin. The ventilation that had kept jungle soldiers alive was now actively harming desert soldiers. This is the pivot point where American procurement realized hot weather was not a single problem. Humidity and sand were 2 different enemies, requiring 2 different solutions. By late 1990, the Pentagon was rushing a redesign that had to solve both at once. The first answer was the initial Desert Combat Boot, rushed into service during Operation Desert Shield in 1990 and into Desert Storm in 1991. The earliest examples were Saudi-made, produced under emergency contract from locally available camel skin leather in a beige tone, issued to American troops while domestic production spun up. The U.S. manufactured version that followed was a tan rough-out leather boot paired with a Panama sole, and every element was a direct response to the previous failures. There were no ventilation ports because sand ingress had proven catastrophic. The rough-out suede exterior diffused solar heat instead of absorbing it the way smooth black leather had. The leather itself was oriented flesh side out, which resisted sand abrasion far better than finished surfaces. But field feedback from sustained Gulf operations exposed a new problem, which was ankle injury. Prolonged patrolling over uneven desert terrain, with soldiers carrying heavy loads in unstable footing, produced a spike in sprains and rolled ankles. The revised Desert Combat Boot that emerged after 1991 addressed this directly. Engineers added a padded collar around the opening to cushion the ankle against the boot's upper edge. They reinforced the ankle with a suede panel that provided lateral stability without adding significant heat retention. A pour-on insole was added to absorb impact on hard-packed terrain. This was the boot that locked in the American desert footwear DNA for the next 35 years, the template every future design would build on. So that DNA is what carried directly into the boots walking Iranian terrain today. The modern American approach divides Iranian terrain into 3 distinct environments, and each one has its own purpose-built boot. The first is the hot weather combat boot, the direct descendant of the revised DCB, built in tan suede and nylon construction and later transitioning to coyote brown to match updated uniform standards. This is the boot for southern Iran, for the Persian Gulf coastline, for Khuzestan and the oil fields, for any environment where pure heat and fine sand dominate the tactical picture. The second is the temperate weather combat boot, engineered in full-grain coyote leather with a Gore-Tex lining for waterproofing. This is the boot for the cooler mountain foothills, for coastal rain, and for the transitional zones where a pure hot weather boot would leave feet cold and wet. Full leather construction retains warmth and repels moisture in a way that breathable desert designs simply cannot. The third is the mountain and cold weather combat boot, engineered for the terrain nobody thinks about when they picture Iran. The Zagros Mountains reach elevations over 14,000 feet and hold snow for months. Northern Iran gets genuinely cold winters. The intermediate cold weather versions, along with the legacy Mickey Mouse-style oversized insulated boots still held in reserve stocks, provide the thermal protection and aggressive tread pattern that desert boots fundamentally cannot. Each of these 3 designs exists because the previous generation could not handle what the next environment demanded. But the Army is not the only force walking Iran, and not every American on the ground wears standard-issue footwear. Special operations forces operate under entirely different requirements, and they wear boots built to match. The Belleville 310 ST is a hot-weather SOF boot built for speed and minimal weight. The Garmin T8 NFS offers near-infrared compliance, a critical feature for units operating with night vision against adversaries who also have it. Under Armour's tactical line has been adopted widely across special operations for its combination of athletic construction and combat durability. These boots prioritize rapid insertion, fast roping, and extended ruck movement over the protection and longevity standard issue demands. Then there are the Navy and Marine Corps desert variants, because amphibious operations in the Persian Gulf impose their own requirements. The Marine Corps hot weather tan boot is optimized for ship-to-shore operations where salt spray and sand interact in corrosive ways. Navy flight deck and shipboard hybrids exist for sailors who transition between deck operations and ground support. Finally, there is the entire commercial market of AR670-1. Compliant boots, soldier-purchased options that meet uniform regulations while allowing personal fit optimization. The Danner Tannicus has become a dominant choice for its combination of lightweight construction and proven durability. The Rocky S2V remains popular for its aggressive traction and ankle support. The McRae Hot Weather series offers a value option that still meets every regulation requirement. On long deployments, the small differences in fit compound into serious consequences, and soldiers are allowed to choose accordingly. All of that evolution converges on what the Army actually issues in 2026. The current standard is the Army Combat Boot in Coyote Brown, available in hot weather and temperate weather configurations, with prototype A, B, and C replacement models currently in field testing for the next generation. The transition from black and tan to Coyote was driven by the adoption of the operational camouflage pattern and multicam uniforms, which demanded a footwear color that integrated visually with the overall camouflage system. But the change was not purely aesthetic. The new generation of ACBs also incorporated improved durability, better sole compounds, and refined ankle geometry based on decades of accumulated field data. Alongside the standard ACB, a new category has emerged called Advanced Lightweight Tactical Boots. These include the Nike Special Field Boot, the OTB Carbon 8, and the Mission-made 8-inch combat boot. Their existence reflects a fundamental shift in modern soldiering. Today's infantryman carries more body armor, more electronics, more ammunition, and more water than any previous generation, and patrol cycles have grown longer. Every ounce on the foot costs multiple ounces of fatigue over a 10-hour mission, and lightweight construction has moved from luxury to operational necessity. This is what the American soldier wears into Iran in 2026. Now cross the line, because the other side of this war walked an entirely different road to get here. Iran's footwear evolution starts from the same place the American one did. What with a black leather combat boot? The standard black leather combat boot of the Artesh, the regular Iranian army, began as a pre-sanctions American-style direct-molded sole design carried over from the Shah era, when Iran's military was closely aligned with U.S. equipment and doctrine. After the 1979 revolution, domestic production took over, producing early Iranian-made copies using simpler leather construction as import lines dried up. But parallel to the regular army, a second footwear supply chain emerged almost immediately. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the besieged paramilitary forces needed their own boot, something cheaper, simpler, and explicitly distinct from what the regular military wore. The result was the IRGC and Bassage Basic Boot. I'm produced in canvas-reinforced black leather with simplified low-ankle versions for volunteer forces. It was mass issue, low cost, and intentionally different from Artesh footwear, reflecting the ideological and organizational separation between the two forces. From the earliest days after the revolution, Iran had two parallel militaries with two parallel supply chains, and the boots on their feet reflected that structural divide. But Iran faced the same terrain problem the Americans did, with none of the American procurement budget. The first Iranian response was the desert-adapted combat boot, which entered service through the 1990s and 2000s, driven directly by the lessons of the Iran-Iraq War. The southern desert fighting of the 1980s had exposed the same heat and sand problems the Americans discovered in the Gulf. And Iranian domestic production responded with tan suede copies that mimicked the design principles of U.S. desert boots, alongside canvas upper hybrid designs that used locally available materials to achieve similar ventilation and weight reduction. These were not exact copies of American boots, but they occupied the same design space, answering the same environmental questions with different resources. The second response was the mountain and rugged terrain boot, which emerged more fully in the 2000s and remains in current service. Iran's geography is not primarily desert. It is dominated by mountain ranges, the Zagros, the Alborz, the rugged highlands of Kurdistan, and standard desert footwear performs badly in that environment. The Iranian mountain boot uses reinforced ankle construction and Vibram-style sole copies manufactured domestically, providing the grip and lateral support that mountain operations demand. This mirrors the American evolution almost exactly, the recognition that Iranian terrain is not one thing but several, requiring specialized footwear for each environment. Then sanctions hit harder, and Iran had to build the entire supply chain from scratch. The current Iranian standard is the domestic modern combat boot, including the Ruyan series compatible black and tan variants and IRGC-specific reinforced models built for the parallel paramilitary supply chain. These boots are fully indigenous, manufactured from domestically sourced materials, assembled in Iranian factories, and engineered without reliance on any imported component. What began as necessity under sanctions has, over time, matured into genuine capability. The materials have improved, the construction has tightened, and the current boots are functionally competitive with mid-tier Western military footwear. Alongside the standard issue, there are specialized IRGC and Special Operations Forces boots, including low-profile tactical designs and quick-lace desert models, built for the asymmetric and rapid response units that have become central to Iranian military doctrine. These elite unit boots reflect an understanding of regional threat profiles, the recognition that Iranian special operators may face American or Israeli forces in scenarios demanding fast movement and modern performance. The Iranian footwear arc closes on a note that defines the entire Iranian military-industrial complex of the last 40 years. Self-reliance that started as necessity ended as capability, and a country that had no choice but to build its own boots now builds boots that work, which puts the two evolutions on the same ground for the first time. America learned from the 1990 Saudi failure and iterated forward through the Gulf, through Iraq, through Afghanistan, through 35 years of accumulated field data, arriving at a Coyote Brown modern standard built on lessons written in blisters and sprained ankles. Iran learned from the Iran-Iraq terrain fights and iterated under sanctions, forced into domestic manufacturing that slowly became real capability, arriving at an indigenous boot that owes nothing to imports. By two very different roads, walking on the same sand, climbing the same mountains, fighting the same war. A soldier's boots reveal the country behind them, its supply chain, its priorities, its history of pain, and on this battlefield, both sides are wearing exactly what their last half-century made them build: